Good evening. Welcome to the Post Rock Extension District. My name is Sandra Wick. I am the crop production agent with K-State Research and Extension. Hopefully you are all continuing to stay safe out there and healthy. I thought that I would hop on tonight and give you an update on the wheat. Mother Nature didn't really cooperate with us again this evening. I wanted to be out in the field, but the winds kind of come up just a little bit. But if that brings rain, that is just excellent. So I decided to go for my living room again, but still show you some plants and things that I have found for you. So we're just going to review just a little bit on kind of what's been happening here with the wheat the last 3 weeks. So we've had at least 3 different low temperature events. The low temperature events are actually a pretty common occurrence that happens in the spring here to our wheat crop. We're fortunate in the Post Rock Extension District and up here in north central Kansas to have 5 K-State or KSU mesonet weather stations here. They're actually in Jewell, Osborne, and we'll show some pictures here of what the weather stations look like. Jewell, Osborne, Mitchell counties, and Republic actually has 2, one in Scandia and one in Belleville. And so these are excellent resources for you in order to get some temperatures. If you don't have a temperature gauge out there, thermometers out there, and you want to know what the air temperature is, soil temperatures, 2 and 4 inch, these are there for you. So just go to KSU Mesonet and you should be able to find it. But those temperatures over the last 3 weeks have ranged from 16 degrees Fahrenheit to up to around 28 degrees as far as the range and the low temperatures. So that's kind of sets the precedence of kind of what has happened around here in the area. So yesterday I traveled around with my cohort, Don. He was my chauffeur. And we were in the rain, and I want to say rain very lightly because I know some of you were very fortunate to receive that rain. Some of you got well over an inch yesterday. But then up here in the northern part of our district or north central Kansas, there wasn't very much rain that people got. So hopefully we'll maybe get some more rain here. But I just want you to remember before we even start this, before I forget, it actually takes 10 to 14 days after the low temperatures to evaluate your wheat for any freeze injury or freeze damage. And then it has to warm up again. And because there's been cold and warm temperatures back and forth with this episode, it may extend that time just a little bit on you going out there and being able to evaluate and see what the damage is going to be on that wheat. So just remember 10 to 14 days and maybe a little bit longer this time. Okay, so how do you determine if there's been any damage or injury? Okay, if you remember last week, I told you that there were 2 main factors that contribute or to go into trying to determine what if there's any injury. First, and probably the most important, is your stage of development. Next would be your temperature, which includes your degree and the duration of that degree or that temperature. So let's just review a little bit on the stage of developments for your wheat plant. A lot of the wheat, when these low temperatures occurred, were in the tillering stage. And what we mean is that growing point or that little wheat head that develops was actually right at the ground level or even below the level. Okay, so when you're at this stage of development, the temperatures can get down as low as 12 degrees for about 2 hours before you may see any significant injury or to start to see any injury to that wheat plant. However, some of our wheat was in the jointing stage, and I've got some wheat sitting by me right here, and this is probably the largest wheat that I saw. There's not a lot that's this tall, but if you got it in early, it might be this tall. Jointed wheat simply means that growing point or that first node is above the ground. And there could have been some that was even 2, maybe 3 inches above the ground. When it's that far in the development stage, the wheat just cannot tolerate those low temperatures as much because that growing point would be exposed or above the ground. It's not insulated. So with this stage, it can only be down to maybe around 24 degrees for a couple hours before you could start seeing some damage. So we certainly had those temperatures, around that for more than 2 hours. So K-State Research and Extension has an excellent publication, and it's the spring freeze injury to Kansas wheat. I mentioned this last week, so this is an excellent publication that has lots of illustrations, lots of information. It shows you a chart on the evaluation of that weed and when the weed's the most sensitive. It also even gives some descriptions on the symptoms to look for and what can happen. Okay, so now let's take a look at the samples that I collected. And to show you kind of what you need to be looking at. Now, this is a picture that I took and put together to kind of show you what we mean by dissecting that plant. So this is actually a tiller, and you just pull off one of the tillers. And if you see kind of diagonally there, and there's some root system down, and then I showed you where the soil line is. Move on up, and that's the first node, or they call it jointed wheat. About a half an inch above that, maybe a little bit further than that, about an inch at this point, that little red circle there is actually the developing wheat head. So it's hard to see at that point. So the next picture here is we zoomed in, and we're going to show you a healthy wheat head and what that looks like. Now, this is actually in the stem. Okay, the only way you're going to be able to see that is with a handheld lens, and we'll show you that in just a minute here. But this is the jointed wheat. So you can see that wheat head, and if you have a little handheld lens, you can actually see that developing wheat head. So this is a healthy one or a good one. It's green, maybe a little whitish, but more green. It's very firm, and it's not watery or mushy or anything like that. So now we're going to show you a contrasting one that I found that looks like it's got some injury to it. See how that's a whitish color, a tannish color. And it's not as full. It looks like it's almost shriveled up. Okay, but this is tiny, tiny, and this is zoomed in, and this is that I've used one of my digital microscopes. So it's very easy to see at this point, but it's kind of hard to find too. But I kind of will give you some more information about that. Okay. So some tools that you need to use in order to see this. All I have is a 10 powered hand lens, and this works real handy because I don't have, I wear glasses, so it's hard to see it with your naked eye, but if you have at least a magnifying lens or a 10 powered hand lens, and then you can see that once you split it. To split it, you will need some sort of a razor blade. A pocket knife will not work. It's too thick because you have to understand these plants or these little tillers are already damaged somewhat because of the low temperatures, so they're very fragile. So if you try to use a pocket knife, you're going to damage part of that before you even start on it. So just a razor blade or an X-Acto knife, anything like that will work as well. Okay. So let's go around and we're going to do some virtual touring of some of the wheat fields that we saw yesterday. We're going to start down the southern part of the district with Lincoln and Mitchell, and we're going to show you a video here of some of the wheat that we saw. And the wheat down there in Lincoln County was probably about 6 to 8 inches tall. And you can see some coloring, the burnt leaf tips and everything. But for the most part, in really good condition, okay, for this particular plant, okay? And so it's primarily was just cosmetic at that point. Now, this wheat that I've got setting by me was down in Lincoln County, but this is one of the taller wheat fields, so it was probably planted a lot earlier than maybe some of the other wheat. That damaged head that I found was in this wheat, okay? But what's really challenging at this point, why we're telling you to wait, is because by the naked eye, this wheat looks pretty good. All you see here is maybe a little cosmetic stuff, the leaf tips and everything. So I wasn't expecting to find that damaged head when I was splitting these stems. But the more I looked, the more I found that, which makes sense if you remember the information that I just shared about the 24 degrees. And in Lincoln County, they reported, down to 19 to 20 degrees for more than 2 hours. And this was pretty sensitive because that developing head was moving on up in the stem. Okay, so that's why we're telling you to wait at least, next week in order to evaluate this to see what the plant does and what that little head does. Alrighty, let's move on to Osborne County. So by looking at this field, you're probably thinking, my, that's just dead and it just doesn't look very good. But this is, would be from the highway or some windshield evaluation. But as when we moved north and a little bit, a lot of the wheat was planted behind soybeans. So it was planted later, so it was smaller. Okay, but let's look at it up close. Take a look and see what's happening to that plant. So if you look up close there, yes, the primary tillers are killed, but if you look at that, the secondary tillers have come back. We've had some nice warm weather. There's moisture. So that plant is trying to survive, okay? The secondary tillers are less productive. We don't know how much because the production of that wheat plant from now here out is really dependent on Mother Nature. If we get the moisture, if we get the right conditions, then we can see if that plant's going to go on and mature until the end. Okay. Now let's move on north a little bit to Jewell and Smith. And Jewell and Smith is probably about the same as far as when they plant. A lot of it's behind soybeans. Now, this is the extreme field. Okay, I don't want you to think that all of it looks like this. But this was a field that was in the bottom. So, extreme cold temperatures, probably 15, 16 degrees for more than 2 hours. So you can see that a lot of it was that those primary tillers are all toasted or dead. If you look real close, you might see the light green in those. Okay, this field, that was on Saturday. This field was taken 4 days later, the same field that you just saw. You can see that the tillers are coming back. That's in 4 days, okay? So it's not the primary tillers. They were damaged or even killed, and now it's shooting at the secondary tillers, okay? So they're going to be a lot later. So what we're concerned about when the secondary tillers come out is the later time, okay? So it's that much later, okay? So the tillers have to start all over again for their production. Plus, you might run into some heat stress. Maybe we're not going to get the moisture. So all of that is very, very weather dependent on what's going to happen from here on out. So what we'd like to show you now is I went over to the wheat plot just today here in Smith County. I wanted to show you a couple varieties that are the newer varieties. So we're going to start with Larry, and that's probably been around for a couple years. And you can see the one in the top left there, and that's just an overall of the stand there. And this was planted on October 15th. And then we took a close-up picture. Okay, so this was a little bit later, okay, so it was planted behind soybeans, and it was planted October 15th. But you can see in that close-up picture that there are a few of the lower leaves that are sloughed off. But for the most part, this is doing really good because the growing point or the stage was pretty much at the tillering stage. So see, it can get down to even 12 degrees, and we didn't have any of those temperatures that were recorded. The next one here is LCS Chrome. And that's another new one. It's probably been around for a couple years as well. But you can see that maybe has a little bit thicker stand, maybe about the same, okay? But the close-up looks about the same, maybe a little bit more tillers. But you can see that the lower leaves, and there was probably some of the primary tillers that were killed off. And so it probably has some primary tillers and some secondary tillers. So the secondary tillers can help compensate for what happens to that wheat as it goes along until maturity. Okay, so lastly here, how do you determine if you need to destroy or to terminate that stand? You know what? That's going to be some really, really tough decisions at this point. Because even within a field, okay, there's different variations. They have different topography. Down on the bottom where I showed that one field, in that same field up on the hill, the wheat looked a lot greener. Okay, so from field to field, it's going to be very specific within that field. So it's very, very field specific. So we can't give you a blanket recommendation that this is what you need to do. You're going to have to go from field to field and evaluate those stands and to see what's going to happen. More importantly, though, you're going to have to remember what your herbicide management program is that you used. Because if you use some of the common herbicides like Ally, Rabe, Olympus, any of those have very strict cropping rotations of what you can go to, okay? So if you use any of those, the rotations may be anywhere from 4 months up to 10 months on what you can do in order to plant that next crop. So a lot of it may determine what herbicide that you used in order to know what you're going to do. But the main key is, and K-State Research and Extension has a chemical weed book, and all of you are familiar with the chemical weed book, that will give you those restrictions on the scheduling for cropping rotation. So make sure you follow those so you're not going to get stuck, if you go out and want to tear up the wheat and then you have nothing to go to, if you would tear that wheat up. So the main thing to remember, I guess the bottom line here, is have patience. Be patient. Wait till next week. Take a look at that wheat again. Maybe we'll get some more rain on it here, and then we'll see if that wheat greens up and see what happens in another week. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give me a call. I love getting pictures. Text me pictures, email me pictures. Give me a call too at any of our Post-Rock Extension District offices in Beloit, Lincoln, Mankato, Osborne, or Smith Center. We are still operating. We still have staff in the offices, so call our offices, or you can text me pictures, our website. Oh, also go to our website. I have lots of information on there as well. The Spring Freeze publication is on my crops webpage. So if you go to crops, and then it's under resources on the right-hand side. So go to our webpage at www.postrock.ksu.edu. Again, thanks for joining us, and we will see you next week for the next Ag Update.